Could a king's love for a favorite bring down his entire kingdom? Did a queen's passion for another man reshape the map of Europe? And what about the empress who rose from a life on the stage to rule an empire? Get ready to uncover the most jaw-dropping royal romances, rivalries, and rebellions from the medieval era, a time stretching from the 5th to the 15th century. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. The year was 1152, and the air was charged with a scandalous political maneuvering that would shake the foundations of two powerful realms. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Europe, had just divorced Louis VII of France after 15 years of marriage. Her reason? Consanguinity, a fancy way of saying they were too closely related, though the real issue was a lack of a male heir and her adventurous spirit chafing under Louis's pious nature. Within weeks, sometimes even described as days, Eleanor, barely a month after her divorce, took a daring step. She married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. He was 11 years her junior, a fiery, ambitious young man, and importantly, he was the heir to the English throne. This swift union was not just a personal choice. It was a bombshell that exploded across the political landscape of Western Europe. Eleanor brought with her the vast and rich Duchy of Aquitaine, a territory larger than Louis VII's own domains. Marrying Henry meant that these lands would now be united with Anjou, Normandy, and eventually England. This new Anglo-Angevin empire, stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees, dwarfed the French king's power and created an immediate, fierce rivalry between the two monarchs. Louis VII felt betrayed, not only by his former wife's rapid remarriage, but by her choice of his most dangerous rival. He tried to reclaim Aquitaine, but Eleanor had already secured her duchy with the merit. The relationship between Eleanor and Henry began with a whirlwind of shared ambition and passion. They were both intelligent, strong-willed, and dynamic individuals together. They seemed unstoppable. They had 8 children, 5 of whom were sons, securing the Plantagenet line. Their early years were marked by a period of intense collaboration, traveling their vast territories, holding court and strategizing. However, the very qualities that drew them together, their powerful personalities and their immense drive, eventually drove them apart. Henry, a king of boundless energy, was known for his restless activity, his bursts of temper, and his numerous affairs. His infidelities became increasingly public and difficult for a queen of Eleanor's stature to ignore. Among these, the most notorious was his long-term affair with Rosamund Clifford, often referred to as the Fair Rosamund. Rosamund was the daughter of a minor Norman, Lord Walter de Clifford. She was reportedly very beautiful, and Henry doted on her. Their relationship began sometime in the mid-1160s and lasted for many years. Henry housed her in a secluded bower at Woodstock Palace, a royal hunting lodge ensuring her privacy. Some accounts describe a maze-like structure leading to her chambers, built to protect her from discovery, especially from the Queen. The existence of Rosamund Clifford was an open secret within the court, a deep humiliation for Eleanor. She, a woman who had once been Queen of France and now Queen of England, the mother of the future king, was forced to contend with her husband's blatant preference for another woman. The betrayal was not just personal. It undermined her dignity and authority as queen. While Henry was engaged with Rosamund, Eleanor began to feel increasingly sidelined, her political influence diminishing as Henry asserted absolute control over his empire and his family. The tension between the royal couple escalated over their sons' inheritances and Henry's reluctance to grant them independent authority. Eleanor, always a keen political player, became a focal point for the discontent of her sons. Henry's sons, particularly Richard, Henry the young king, and Geoffrey, resented their father's refusal to give them real power. Even though they had been crowned or granted titles, they chafed under his absolute rule. In 1173, these simmering resentments erupted into open rebellion. Eleanor actively encouraged her sons to rise against their father. She fled Henry's court and attempted to join her sons in Paris dressed as a man, a detail that chronicles of the time found both shocking and telling of her resolve. She was captured by Henry's agents before she could reach her destination and swiftly taken back to England. Henry, furious at her perceived betrayal and her role in fomenting the rebellion, imprisoned her. Her imprisonment was not a harsh dungeon experience, but she was confined to various royal strongholds, primarily Winchester and Salisbury, for the next 15 years. During this time, Henry continued his affair with Rosamund, seemingly unhindered by Eleanor's absence. However, Rosamund's story took a turn. She reportedly fell ill and died in 1176. Some speculate from illness, though later romanticized accounts, quite detached from historing Rosamund, tell of Eleanor constorting Rosamund and offering her a choice between a dagger and poison. These tales, however captivating, are largely seen as dramatic embellishments reflecting the public's perception of the intense animosity between the two women. Rosamund was buried at Gaveston nunnery, where Henry made generous donations for her soul. Eleanor remained imprisoned throughout the rest of Henry's reign, occasionally released for holidays or important state functions, but always under strict supervision. Her confinement highlighted the precarious position even a powerful queen held if she defied her husband, especially one as authoritarian as Henry II. The long years of her imprisonment, however, did not break her spirit. When Henry II finally died in 1189, his eldest surviving son, Richard the Lionheart, ascended to the throne. Richard's first act as king was to release his mother. Eleanor, now a woman in her late 60s, emerged from her long confinement with her political acumen undimmed. She immediately took up the reins of power, serving as regent for Richard while he embarked on the Third Crusade. She traveled extensively, securing oaths of fealty, raising funds, and dealing with various political crises. She even journeyed to Germany to negotiate Richard's release from captivity after his capture returning from the Crusade. Her release marked a dramatic turnaround. Eleanor, once a queen scorned and imprisoned, returned to the center of European politics, wielding significant power and influence. She outlived Henry by 15 years, dying in 1204 at the age of 82. Having seen two of her sons, Richard and John, rule England, her story is a testament to an extraordinary will and a fierce determination. The affair between Henry and Rosamund, while a personal tragedy for Eleanor, ultimately became a catalyst for her direct defiance of Henry and which in turn set the stage for her remarkable comeback as a powerful regent and queen dowager, shaping the future of the Plantagenet dynasty. The scandal of the affair and the Queen's rebellion became deeply woven into the fabric of the Plantagenet court, a stark reminder of the volatile personal and political dynamics that characterized royal life in the High Middle Ages. Number 2. Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer. The early 14th century was a turbulent time for the English monarchy, and at its heart was a scandal involving a queen, a powerful baron, and the dramatic downfall of a king. Isabella of France, often called the She-Wolf of France, was married to Edward II of England. Their union, celebrated with great pomp in 1308, was supposed to solidify peace between England and France. Isabella was the daughter of Philip IV, the fair King of France, and was considered one of the most beautiful princesses in Europe. However, from the very beginning, their marriage was plagued by Edward II's deep and intense favoritism towards certain male companions, particularly Piers Gaveston. Edward showered Gaveston with titles, wealth, and affection, often openly displaying his devotion, which infuriated the English nobility. Isabella found herself sidelined, her status as queen diminished by the king's open disregard and his overwhelming focus on Gaveston. She endured years of this public slight, her political standing and personal dignity suffering greatly. The barons, already resentful of Edward's perceived incompetence and his reliance on Gaveston, saw the king's behavior towards his queen as further evidence of his unsuitability to rule. After Gaveston's eventual execution by the barons in 1312, Edward simply replaced him with other favorites, most notably Hugh Despenser the Younger. The Despensers, father and son, became immensely powerful, acquiring vast lands and influencing royal policy, which further alienated Isabella and the rest of the nobility. Hugh Despenser the Younger was particularly disliked for his avarice, his arrogance, and his cruel treatment of anyone who stood in his way. He actively worked to undermine Isabella's position, even confiscating her dower lands, which were her rightful income as queen. Isabella, a proud and intelligent woman, was pushed to her breaking point. Her petitions to her husband for justice and for the return of her lands were ignored. She found herself in a precarious position, her personal safety perhaps even at risk from the Despensers' unchecked power. In 1325, a diplomatic opportunity arose. Isabella's brother, Charles IV of France, had seized Edward II's French territories. To resolve the conflict, Isabella was sent to France to negotiate. This journey became her escape from her suffocating life in England. Once in France, she flatly refused to return to Edward. Her sons were sent to join her effectively, placing them out of Edward's reach. It was during this period at the French court that Isabella encountered Roger Mortimer, a powerful English baron, who had been exiled by Edward II for his opposition to the Despensers. Mortimer was mad at cunning. He and Isabella shared a common enemy in Edward and the Despensers, and a common desire for retribution. Their relationship blossomed in France. It was not just a political alliance, but reportedly a passionate love affair. The Queen of England and an exiled baron, openly defying the king, became the talk of European courts. Isabella used her position as the King of France's sister to rally support and financial backing for an invasion of England. Mortimer, with his military experience and political acumen, became her trusted advisor and commander. Together, they plotted the overthrow of Edward II and the Despensers. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer, accompanied by a small force of mercenaries and disaffected English nobles, landed on the English coast at Orford. They were met not with resistance but with widespread support. The English populace and nobility, tired of Edward's weak rule and the Despensers' tyranny, flocked to Isabella's banner. Edward II and Hugh Despenser the Younger fled, attempting to raise an army, but their support had crumbled. The invasion became a triumphal march. The Despensers were quickly captured and met brutal ends. Hugh Despenser the Younger was convicted of treason and tyranny. He was publicly hanged, drawn, and quartered. A horrific spectacle meant to satisfy the public's desire for vengeance. His body was displayed as a warning. Edward II himself was captured shortly after. His fate, orchestrated by Isabella and Mortimer, was more complex. Parliament was convened in 1327, where the king was formally deposed. His alleged incompetence, his favoritism, and his disregard for his kingdom were cited as reasons. His young son, Edward III, was crowned king, but true power rested with Isabella and Mortimer, who became the de facto regents of England. Mortimer reveled in his newfound power. He accumulated vast wealth, assumed the title of Earl of March, and acted with an arrogance that rivaled that of the Despensers. He governed England alongside Isabella, their influence absolute. However, their rule was marked by growing unpopularity. Mortimer's greed and the sheer audacity of his power, coupled with the scandal of his relationship with Isabella, began to alienate even their former allies. They were widely believed to be involved in a horrific death of Edward II in Berkeley Castle in September 1327. While the exact circumstances of his death remained debated, the prevailing belief was that Isabella and Mortimer ordered his murder, a belief foiled by a gruesome rumor of a red-hot poker, a detail that cemented their infamous reputations in history. Young Edward III, though king, was kept under tight control by his mother and Mortimer. But as he grew older, he resented their domineering rule and the scandalous nature of their relationship. In 1330, at the age of 18, Edward III took decisive action. With the help of trusted allies, he launched a daring nighttime raid on Nottingham Castle, where Isabella and Mortimer were staying. Mortimer was captured in the Queen's chambers, a detail that further underscored their intimate connection and the impropriety of their power. He was swiftly tried and convicted of treason. Like the Despensers before him, Roger Mortimer was publicly hanged at Tyburn, London, in November 1330. Isabella was spared execution, perhaps out of respect for her royal blood and her son's reluctance to execute his own mother. She was, however, forced to retire from public life and spent the rest of her days under a comfortable but strict house arrest, living in various royal manors. She lived for another 27 years, often visited by her son, King Edward III, but her days of political power and scandalous influence were definitively over. The story of Isabella and Mortimer remains one of the most dramatic power plays in English history. A tale of ambition, betrayal, and a love affair that reshaped the kingdom. Number 3, Edward II and Piers Gaveston. In the late 13th and early 14th centuries, the English court was dominated by a relationship so intense and unconventional that it sparked civil war and ultimately led to the tragic downfall of a king. Edward II, who became King of England in 1307, was known for his striking looks and his indifference to the traditional duties of kingship. Instead of warfare and governance, Edward preferred more leisurely pursuits, rowing, ditch-digging, thatching roofs, and interacting with common laborers. But his true passion and the source of immense scandal was his deep devotion to Piers Gaveston. Piers Gaveston was a Gascon knight, the son of one of Edward I's loyal commanders. He had been a companion to Edward, then Prince of Wales, since their youth. Edward I, a formidable and traditional king, had exiled Gaveston in 1307, likely sensing the intense bond between him and his son and fearing its potential political repercussions. However, immediately upon his father's death and his own ascension to the throne, Edward II's first act was to recall Gaveston from exile. What followed was an extraordinary display of royal favoritism. Edward showered Gaveston with titles, wealth, and honors, making him Earl of Cornwall, a title previously reserved for members of the royal family. He gave Gaveston immense gifts of jewels, lands, and money. More controversially, Edward publicly displayed his affection for Gaveston in ways that shocked and offended the conservative English nobility. Chroniclers of the time noted the king's intense love for Gaveston, using words that suggested a bond far beyond simple friendship. Phrases like immoderate affection and undue and inordinate love appeared in contemporary accounts. Edward's favoritism extended to allowing Gaveston immense influence in court affairs, even to the point of Gaveston reportedly mocking the most powerful barons with insulting nicknames. This open favoritism caused a profound rift between the king and his leading nobles, particularly his cousin Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, one of the most powerful men in England. The barons saw Gaveston as a low-born upstart who was corrupting the king and undermining royal authority. Their resentment simmered, fueled by Gaveston's arrogance and Edward's refusal to heed their complaints. The financial drain of Edward's lavish gifts to Gaveston, combined with his disinterest in governance and warfare, further exacerbated the crisis. Edward's marriage to Isabella of France in 1308, a powerful alliance with the French crown, was another point of contention. Edward was reportedly late to his own wedding, preferring to spend time with Gaveston. He lavished attention and expensive gifts on Gaveston, even at the expense of his new queen. Isabella, a proud and beautiful princess, found herself publicly humiliated and neglected. This neglect of his queen and the open preference for Gaveston deeply offended the French royal family and further alienated the English nobility. The barons, united by their outrage, forced Edward to exile Gaveston multiple times. Each time Edward reluctantly agreed, only to recall his favorite as soon as he felt the political pressure had eased. Gaveston's returns were always marked by renewed royal favor and further outrage from the nobility. the cycle of banishment and recall highlighted Edward's stubborn devotion and his inability to govern. Without Gaveston by his side. In 1311, the barons, led by the Earl of Lancaster, forced Edward to accept the Ordinances, a series of reforms designed to limit royal power and banish Gaveston permanently. Edward, under duress, agreed. But it was not long before Edward, unable to bear the separation, recalled him again in late 1311. This act was the final straw. The barons, now fully militarized, declared Gaveston an outlaw and vowed to capture him. In 1312, Gaveston was besieged by the barons at Scarborough Castle. He surrendered to Aymer de Valence, Earl of Pembroke, under the promise of safe conduct to the king. However, on the journey, Gaveston was seized by the Earl of Warwick, known as the Black Dog of Arden, for his fierce temperament. Without a formal trial and in clear violation of the agreement, Gaveston was taken to Blacklow Hill near Warwick on June 19, 1312, in a brutal act of defiance against the king. Piers Gaveston was summarily executed. He was stabbed, then beheaded. The news of Gaveston's death defiloed. This act of violence, committed by his own barons, ignited a period of open conflict and deep resentment between the king and his magnates. Edward vowed revenge for the murder of his beloved companion. The years that followed were marked by political instability, fluctuating power between the king and the barons, and Edward's continued inability to effectively rule continued to alienate the nobility, eventually replacing Gaveston with a new, equally resented favorite, Hugh Despenser. The younger king's enduring affection for Gaveston, and his failure to learn from the extreme consequences of that affection, shaped the rest of his reign. The public perception of Edward as a king who prioritized his personal attachments over his royal duties and his inability to control his barons ultimately led to his downfall. In 1326, Edward II was overthrown by his wife, Queen Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, with the support of many of the same barons who had opposed Gaveston. Edward II died in 1327, likely murdered. His reign a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of a king's personal affections clashing violently. The scandalous relationship between Edward II and Piers Gaveston, unconventional for its time, remains a pivotal moment in English history, a tale of love, power, and devastating betrayal. Number 4. King John and Isabella of Angoulême. The year 1200 saw a scandalous decision by King John of England that plunged his kingdom into a new round of conflict, losing him vast territories and forever staining his reputation. King John, often remembered as one of England's most problematic monarchs, was known for his unpredictable temperament, his grasping nature, and his general disregard for feudal custom. In August 1200, John, then 33 years old, was already married to Isabella of Gloucester. Their marriage had been largely political and childless, and John decided it was time for an annulment. The annulment was quickly granted on the grounds of consanguinity, their distant family relationship. What happened next sent shockwaves across Europe. King John was on a journey through his French territories when he met Isabella of Angoulême. Isabella was a dazzlingly beautiful girl, barely 12 years old. She was, crucially, already betrothed to Hugh X of Lusignan, a powerful and influential nobleman in Poitou, a region that lay between John's Angevin lands and Hugh's territories. The betrothal had been agreed upon for years, a firm political arrangement intended to secure peace and alliances in the region. King John, notorious for his impulsiveness and his quick infatuations, was immediately captivated by Isabella's beauty. Despite the pre-existing betrothal and completely disregarding the customary protocols of feudal loyalty and alliance, John decided he would marry Isabella himself. He seized her from her guardians, and without consulting Hugh X or seeking his permission, married Isabella of Angoulême in Bordeaux on August 24, 1200. This act was a colossal insult to Hugh X of Lusignan, and a blatant disregard for established feudal law and honor. It was not just a personal slight, It was a political provocation of the highest order. Hugh X, naturally, was furious. He had been publicly humiliated and deprived of his intended bride, a woman who came with significant territorial advantages for him. He appealed to King Philip II, Augustus of France, John's overlord for his French territory, seeking justice. Philip Augustus, a shrewd and ambitious monarch, saw this as a golden opportunity to weaken John's power and reclaim lost territories for the French crown. He summoned John to appear before his court in Paris to answer the charges brought by Hugh X. John, believing himself above such feudal obligations, refused to appear. His refusal was a grave mistake. In 1202, Philip Augustus declared John a rebellious vassal. He announced that all of John's continental possessions, including the vast duchy of Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, were forfeit to the French crown. This ruling, largely justified by John's scandalous actions regarding Isabella and his refusal to answer Philip's summons, ignited a massive war. The war that followed was disastrous for John. His reputation for deceit, his heavy taxation, and his unreliable nature meant he had little support from his English barons, let alone his continental vassals. Many of his former allies in Normandy and Anjou, already weary of his rule, sided with Philip Augustus, or offered no resistance. The scandalous marriage, which alienated a key regional power like Hugh X of Lusignan, undermined any potential alliances John might have forged against the French king. In 1204, after a swift and decisive campaign by Philip Augustus, the mighty fortress of Château Gaillard, built by John's brother Richard the Lionheart, fell. This marked the effective end of English rule in Normandy. Soon after, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine also fell to the French. Within a few years, John had lost almost all of his continental possessions, earning him the derisive nickname Lackland in some circles, although this nickname predated his reign. The loss of these territories was a monumental blow to the Plantagenet dynasty, which had held them for over a century. The scandalous marriage to Isabella of Angoulême was not the sole reason for John's disastrous reign, but it was a critical catalyst for the events that led to the loss of Normandy. It demonstrated John's impulsiveness, his disregard for feudal norms, and his tendency to create enemies through his personal behavior. Isabella, for her part, seems to have been a loyal, if somewhat flighty, wife to John. They had 5 children together, including the future King Henry III. Despite the controversy surrounding their marriage, Isabella remained with John until his death in 1216. After John's death, Isabella of Angoulême returned to France, and in another surprising turn of events, married Hugh X of Lusignan, the very man she had been snatched from decades earlier. She bore him 9 children and remained a powerful figure in Poitou. Her life was defined by the scandalous circumstances of her youth, caught between 2 powerful men whose conflict reshaped the map of Europe. King John's impulsive, scandalous affair with Isabella and his subsequent marriage served as a potent example of how a king's personal choices could trigger far-reaching political and military consequences, leading to the irreversible loss of a vast empire. Number 5. Peter the Cruel and Maria de Padilla. In the mid-14th century, the Kingdom of Castile, located on the Iberian Peninsula, was rocked by a scandalous love affair that spiraled into a devastating civil war and left a trail of betrayal and murder. This was the story of King Peter I of Castile, known as Peter the Cruel, and his extraordinary devotion to his mistress, Maria de Padilla, at the expense of his queen. Peter ascended the throne in 1350 at the young age of 16. He was a king with a complex personality, intelligent, decisive, but also prone to extreme acts of violence and a ruthless determination. His first marriage was a political necessity intended to secure alliances and produce an heir. In 1353, he was formally married to Blanche of Bourbon, a French princess, as part of an alliance with France. This union was highly anticipated and carried significant political weight. However, almost immediately after the wedding ceremony, Peter abandoned Blanche. He had already fallen deeply in love with a Castilian noblewoman named Maria de Padilla. Maria was from a prominent family known for her beauty, charm, and intelligence. Peter's infatuation with her was absolute. He had met her a few years before his marriage to Blanche, and their relationship had already begun. When Blanche arrived in Castile for the wedding, Peter treated her with open disdain. He refused to consummate the marriage, and within days of the ceremony he left her. He then had Blanche imprisoned first in the castle of Arevalo, then in Toledo, and later in Medina Sidonia, among other places. This immediate and public abandonment of his queen for his mistress was an astonishing act of defiance against not only traditional royal custom, but also international diplomacy. It was a grave insult to France, a powerful kingdom, and a breach of the marriage treaty. His actions shocked the courts of Europe. The French king, Charles V, was furious at the humiliation of his sister and demanded her release and proper treatment. Maria de Padilla, despite her unofficial status, wielded immense influence over Peter. She was not merely a mistress, she was his trusted confidant and advisor. She was known to be a calm and sensible presence, often trying to temper Peter's more violent tendencies. They had 4 children together, 3 daughters and a son. Alfonso. Peter treated these children as legitimate heirs even though his marriage to Blanche had not been annulled. He remained deeply devoted to Maria until her death. The Castilian nobility and the church were appalled by Peter's treatment of Blanche and his open bigamy. The Castilian clergy, led by the Archbishop of Toledo, condemned his actions and excommunicated him. Several rebellions erupted, fueled by disaffected nobles who used Blanche's plight as a rallying cry. Peter's half-brother, Henry of Trastamara, a formidable military leader, seized the opportunity to challenge Peter. For the throne, Henry presented himself as the legitimate alternative, promising to restore order and respect for tradition. The ongoing conflict between Peter and Henry became known as the Castilian Civil War, a brutal and bloody struggle that lasted for years. Blanche of Bourbon became a pawn in this power struggle. Her imprisonment and suffering became a symbol of Peter's tyranny. Tragically, in 1361, after 8 years of imprisonment, Blanche of Bourbon died. The circumstances of her death were suspicious. While some accounts suggest illness, it was widely believed that Peter ordered her murder. This act further cemented his reputation as Peter the Cruel and fueled the fires of the Civil War. Maria de Padilla continued to hold Peter's affections even after Blanche's death. Peter went to extraordinary lengths to legitimize their relationship. He declared that he had secretly married Maria before his marriage to Blanche, making Blanche's marriage invalid from the start. He even arranged for an assembly of clergy to confirm this secret marriage, though it was largely seen as a desperate attempt to legitimize his children with Maria. However, Maria herself died shortly after Blanche, possibly from the plague. Her death plunged Peter into deep mourning. Despite Maria's death, the Civil War continued. Henry of Trastamara received support from France and Aragon, while Peter sought alliances with England, particularly with Edward the Black Prince and his father, Edward III. The war became intertwined with the larger 100 Years' War between England and France. Eventually, after years of brutal fighting, Henry of Trastamara defeated Peter. In 1369, Peter I was captured, and in a shocking moment, personally killed by his half-brother Henry in a tent in Montiel, ending his reign and his life. The scandalous affair between Peter and Maria and the king's cruel abandonment of his queen Blanche irrevocably shaped the history of Castile. It was a catalyst for a devastating civil war that saw 2 half-brothers locked in a deadly struggle for the throne. The long-term consequences included a change in dynasty from the House of Burgundy to the House of Trastamara, and left a bitter legacy of violence and instability that would mark the kingdom for generations. The story remains a stark example of how a king's personal passions, when allowed to override political and moral obligations, could plunge an entire nation into chaos. Number 6. Theodora and Justinian I. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire, was led by a couple whose rise to power was one of the most scandalous and compelling stories of the age. Emperor Justinian I, a brilliant and ambitious ruler, would forever be linked with Theodora, a woman from a humble background whose past life as an actress and possibly a courtesan made her an utterly shocking choice for an empress. Justinian, born around 482, was a shrewd and intelligent man who began his career in the imperial administration, serving his uncle, Emperor Justin I. He was destined for greatness, known for his legal reforms and his ambition to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. Theodora, born around 500 AD, came from a very different world. Her father was a bearkeeper for the Hippodrome, Constantinople's grand chariot racing arena. From a young age, Theodora and her sisters were involved in the entertainment world, a profession that often carried a social stigma and was associated with prostitution in that era. Theodora began her career as an actress, specifically a mime. Mime, at that time, was far removed from silent performance. It often involved satirical comedy, singing, and even erotic dancing. Contemporary historians, particularly Procopius in his Secret History, describe Theodora's early life in vivid, though often hostile, detail. Procopius paints a picture of a woman who was exceedingly beautiful, witty, and bold, but also one who engaged in promiscuous behavior and performed on stage in ways considered shocking and vulgar by respectable society. She traveled extensively, working in various cities, before eventually returning to Constantinople. Her past as an actress and courtesan made her an outcast in polite society. Aristocratic families would never consider marrying a woman with such a background. Yet when Justinian met Theodora, he was utterly captivated. He was drawn to her intelligence, her strength of character, her sharp wit, and her undeniable charisma. Their connection was immediate and profound. Justinian, then still a powerful figure in the imperial court, but not yet emperor, became determined to marry her. This decision was met with profound shock and resistance from the imperial court and aristocratic families. The idea of a man of Justinian's stature marrying an actress with such a scandalous past was almost unthinkable. Roman law at the time explicitly forbade high-ranking officials from marrying actresses. However, Justinian was unyielding. He convinced his uncle, Emperor Justin, to change the law specifically to allow him to marry Theodora. This alteration of imperial law for a personal reason was unprecedented and a testament to Justinian's resolve and Theodora's powerful hold over him. In 525, Justinian and Theodora were married. 2 years later, upon the death of Justin I, Justinian became emperor. And, in an even more astonishing move, Justinian elevated Theodora to the rank of Augusta, co-empress. With equal standing and power to himself, this was not a mere honorary title. Theodora proved to be an exceptionally capable ruler, a true partner in governance. She was intelligent, politically astute, and possessed an iron will. She attended imperial councils, corresponded with foreign leaders, and even held her own court. Her past, however, was never forgotten. The scandal of her origins clung to her, and Procopius's Secret History, written decades later, continued to circulate rumors and condemnations of her early life, even as he simultaneously praised her strength and wisdom in his official works. Despite the gossip and disapproval, Theodora wielded significant power. She was particularly known for her efforts to protect women and the vulnerable. She campaigned against forced prostitution, established institutions for former courtesans, and reformed laws concerning marriage and divorce to favor women. Her personal experiences likely informed her passionate advocacy for these social reforms. The strength of their partnership was most famously demonstrated during the Nika riots of 532. This was a massive, violent uprising in Constantinople, Fueled by political grievances and religious tensions, the riots escalated to the point where much of the city was in flames, and Justinian and his advisors were on the verge of fleeing the capital. It was Theodora who, with remarkable courage and defiance, refused to retreat. She famously declared that purple, the imperial color, made a fine shroud, and that fleeing would be worse than death. Her unwavering resolve shamed Justinian and his generals into action. They rallied the imperial guard and brutally suppressed the rebellion, saving Justinian's throne. Her actions during the Nika riots cemented her image as a powerful and indispensable co-ruler. Theodora continued to rule alongside Justinian, sharing in his ambitions and his power, until her death. In 548, likely from cancer, Justinian was heartbroken by her loss and never remarried. He relied on her counsel throughout their marriage, and many believe her influence was crucial to his success. Her life is a powerful narrative of social mobility, resilience, and the overturning of societal norms. The scandalous love affair between Justinian and Theodora, a union that defied all conventions of their time, ultimately resulted in one of the most powerful and influential imperial partnerships in Byzantine history.